When I was about 25 or so, my boyfriend and I decided to live apart. We were broken up for a very short while, and when we got back together, we just kept separate places for a long time. I highly recommend all women live on their own for at least a year before they decide to cohabitate. I learned a lot of life lessons during this time. My apartment was pretty amazing for a young single woman who was supporting herself. Although it was a one-bedroom, it boasted a separate office and dining room as well. Each room was a separate room with its own door. However, the layout was a little strange, except for the bathroom. The rooms didn't branch off a hallway. Instead, you went through each room separately to get through the place. And my bedroom was at the end. When you entered the apartment, the rooms went as follows. Living room to the office. Then you either turned right to a small hallway that led to the bedroom. The bathroom branched off here, or you went straight ahead and into the kitchen. Then turned right to go to the dining room, then the bedroom. The best feature of my apartment was accessible from the kitchen. The back door opened up onto a large covered balcony. The place was large, cheap. $450 monthly in the year 2000 and all utilities paid. I even got basic free cable. The landlords were a rare find. They were elderly and sweet and quickly took care of issues that came up. With one exception. My back door, the one leading to the balcony, had no lock on it. Now, it's actually mostly my fault that I didn't make it a priority to get it fixed. I really thought I was pretty safe because the balcony had no steps leading down or anything and the wall was sheer. The balcony was high up enough that a standard ladder would not reach it. So, if somebody tried to enter, they would have to be extremely determined. Now, my decorating tastes are a little boho, and I'm fond of stuff that sparkles and shines. My apartment reflected my tastes and was decorated with fairies and crystals and butterflies. I had sun catchers and wind chimes in the appropriate locations. A friend gave me a couple of sets of miniature fairy chimes as a gift, and as they were very small, I decided to hang them on each of my doors. I enjoyed the slight tinkling sound they made whenever the doors opened and closed. I'm thankful for my electric tastes. I'm sitting in the office playing some flash time waster of a game on my computer when I hear the chimes on my balcony door. I assume I had failed to shut it completely and the wind had blown it open, so I jump up to close it again. And I come face to face with a skinny, shirtless, sweaty ginger dude with jailhouse tats all over his chest. He's obviously surprised to see me. I'm scared shitless, but I try not to show it. You hear all these stories of people getting severely beaten or even killed when interrupting a robbery. I'm surprised that he didn't just knock me over the head with something and run, but luckily he didn't. What the heck are you doing? The guy kind of laughs and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just here to do some contracting work on your apartment." "So, how did you get in?" "Is some dude here?" "Who?" "Yeah, I work for some dude and he told me I'd have to climb the porch. He said the back door would be unlocked." I look out and there's no ladder, rope, or anything to climb on. I'm thinking, so, who does this dude think he is? Batman? I have no idea who some dude is and there's no work scheduled for this apartment. Also, in case you haven't noticed this, I gesture toward the balcony, nearly screaming now, "It's not a freaking porch." As Ginger Dude is mumbling again about how he was hired by some dude to do work and something about climbing the porch, I realize that he is not so steady on his feet. He is also slurring his words a bit. Great. The guy is under the influence of something, and through his stupid, senseless mumbling, I finally just resort to screaming. "Get out." Over and over. He says he feels really bad about scaring me, and before I realize what is happening, he grips me in a smelly, sweaty hug. He goes out the door, and the second he is gone, I have a full-blown panic attack. I'm bent over, head between my knees, wondering faintly if I should call the police or someone when I hear a terrific crash. From my living room area. As it turns out, Ginger Dude had gone into another part of my building and climbed into the attic area. As he was poking around, he lost his footing. There are beams you have to step on to get across the attic and fell through my ceiling. I stand in my living room and I'm looking at a pair of scrawny legs poking through my suspended ceiling. He pulls himself up and in a high-pitched, smart-ass kind of voice calls out, "Excuse me." This infuriates me, and being the smart modern woman I am, I go storming into the attic to confront him. He once again starts giving me his BS story about being hired to do work on the place, and I tell him he's full of it. He holds his hands up in an appeasing manner and says, "Okay, so what do you want from me?" Tell him, "What I want is for you to go downstairs and I want you to sit on the curb and I want you to wait for the police because I am calling them right now. They are coming and they're going to take you to jail. When the police show up, he is sitting obediently on the curb, patiently awaiting his ride to the pokey. Turns out his girlfriend at the time was in the apartment next to me, and he thought he was breaking into her place. My landlord got a new lock on that door in short order. But wait folks, there's more. Eventually, I got called to testify in court against him, along with a number of other people whose homes he apparently also invaded. I get approached by somebody named Brittany in a teensy denim skirt, and this is the conversation. Britt, are you the girl whose apartment Ginger Boy broke into? Yes, I am. Oh, well, I'm his ex. Oh. No, not your neighbor, I'm his baby mama. Yes, she said that. Are you going to press charges? Yes, I am. Well, I don't blame you, but I just wanted to let you know that he has a 2-year-old and a baby on the way, so you might want to think about that. Why? He didn't think about it before he did what he did to me. He has kids to support. I just think you should think about it, that's all. Look, I appreciate your situation, but... My situation? I have no situation. He never gave me anything. He hasn't seen his child in months. Maybe you should think about that then. As for me, I'll be pressing charges. It turns out Ginger Boy had broken into multiple homes and actually attacked an elderly woman who happened to be home when he broke in. He got 5 years for breaking into my place. Not sure what he got for the others. Maybe it was 5 years total, I really just forget. The courthouse took a couple of hours, but I got a paid day off from work because I was subpoenaed. I have no idea why he didn't attack me like he did the elderly lady. I feel extremely lucky because usually stories like this don't end as well. It did, however, give me one heck of a story to tell. There was a girl that my husband had known through mutual friends that started bothering him shortly after we got married. At first, it was just her texting him. He tried to be polite, but then she started texting him inappropriate things like he should leave me at least for a day so they could sleep together. Then she started calling. At first, it was just from her phone, but when he wouldn't answer, she started using her friends' phones. This escalated into her calling from one of her friends' phones repeatedly one night. He got fed up and answered it to tell her to stop calling. She ended up being drunk and, regardless of what he said, just kept repeating that it was her birthday. He hung up, and immediately after, the same number called. This time I answered, and it was her friend. She was too inebriated to comprehend that I was not him and kept begging for him to just wish this girl a happy birthday. I told her nobody was interested in doing that, and if she called back, I was going to call the police. Apparently that struck a chord since they were both under 21. After that, she tried to break into an apartment we lived in. The first time, she thought nobody was home because my husband had our car with him at work. I had just popped in finding Nemo for our daughter so I could go clean her room. As I walked back towards her room, I heard the front door slam open and bounce off of the chain lock. Fortunately, I had latched it before I went to clean her room. At first, I thought maybe my husband had come home from work early and tried to get in. But as I called him, I looked out the door and saw her car whipping out of the parking lot. A couple of weeks later, we caught her parking in front of our apartment as we were returning from grocery shopping. She tried to quickly pull out and hide behind the garbage area, but we followed her. She realized that she was caught and quickly drove past us and out of the apartment complex. For a while after that, she stuck to just trying to stalk and harass us on social media, but shortly after I had our son, we went to the store and a car sped into the parking spot next to ours. She and her friends piled out of the car and it was pretty obvious at that point that they had followed us there. We decided to go in anyway. It was a big store and a very public place, so it seemed like it would be okay. Not long after we entered the store, I leaned past the cart to grab a carton of juice and could see her from out of the corner of my eye. She was just standing there staring, completely oblivious. She had broken off from her friends and just stood in some kind of daze staring at my husband. I don't think she even realized I could see what she was doing until I said her name, and she seemed to snap out of it. She looked at me, back at him, and scurried into the aisle her friends were in. We got what we needed and went to the only open checkout. She and her friends stood in the jewelry section that was about 6 or 7 feet away and started hurling insults and yelling things at us. The cashier kept looking at us and then them, but I don't think any of us really knew what to do. They were obviously adults and were standing in the middle of a store where other people were, yelling stuff at a couple and their 2 small children. We quickly took our bags and left before they could follow us. She called a mutual friend of ours right after that and told him that she was going to mess up our car and that she needed our phone numbers and addresses. He told us, and for us, that was the last straw. We got a court order from her to stay away from us, and she was told to also advise her friends not to bother us. She didn't understand, obviously, because the same day we had court, she attempted to harass me on social media, but quickly stopped when she realized I had proof of what she had been doing. We later found out that when she received the order, she told people that she had won in court, and that she knew my husband still wanted to talk to her. There also ended up being more to what she was doing. Like she was blatantly telling people that she wanted to follow us when she saw our car and referring to him as her first love, as well as telling people that they dated. Also, when she would talk about him to other people, she would make him sound single and leave out the fact that he was married or has 2 children. That is just the tip of all the crazy that we ended up finding about. We got lucky and now she lives in a different country. For now. About 10 years ago, when I was a 14-year-old, I had a little bit of a stalker. I lived in a growing town. When I was younger, it was really safe, but over the years, it got pretty rough. We lived in an okay area by the library, which was surrounded by a field of plants that looked like they belonged in a prairie, and an extremely large park that sat across from the library. I would always walk my dog by the semi-busy road in front of the library. I tended to avoid the park because it was heavily forested and relatively isolated for being next to a through road, and some unsavory stuff has gone down in that area. At this point in time, it was summer and both my parents worked, so I had the house to myself. I would usually sleep in until about 10 or 11 a.m., then eat, get ready, walk the dog, and head out to do whatever my little teen heart desired. This resulted in me walking my dog around noon almost every day. We would walk down in front of the library and the field, then turn around and backtrack once we got to the little bridge by the forest that crossed the stream. My dog at the time was old and a bit heftier than she should have been, so we always took it nice and slow. Round trip, it took us about 20 minutes, but I could walk that distance at a normal pace in half the time. One day, while we were walking, I noticed a boy shadowing our pace on his bike on the other side of the street. Normally, I would not have noticed him, but a car of young men had honked at me, and when I looked, there he was on the other side of the road. He looked ethnically ambiguous and was a rather attractive teen. I had never seen him before, but I felt like hot shit since an older boy, I assumed 16 or 17, was checking me out. He looked ethnically ambiguous and I thought he was attractive. I had never seen him before, but I felt like hot shit since an older boy, I assumed 16 or 17, was checking me out. At the time, I was about 5'7" and had just lost a bunch of weight. I frequently got mistaken for being older than I was because of my height and the way I carried myself. Anyways, once my sausage of a dog and I got to the bridge, we turned around and headed back home. I looked back to see where my Prince Charming was, and he was riding off into the distance. I felt a bit disappointed, expecting some huge romance out of this measly moment. After dropping my dog off at home, I headed to a friend's house and we talked about this encounter briefly before jumping in her pool. The next day when I was walking my dog, I noticed the same boy up ahead, sitting with his bike on a park bench across from the library. My little heart fluttered with excitement, thinking I was heading towards a fairy tale romance with a knight and his noble 6-speed. I played it cool, pretending I didn't see him. He watched me walk down the sidewalk and back. Even when I looked over and smiled, he said and did nothing. I found this rather odd, but was so excited that he was there again. I hurried over to the same friend's house and we geeked out about the stoic Prince Charming. This type of thing went on for about 2 weeks. He would alternate between shadowing me on the opposite side of the road and sitting on the park bench and watching. After about the 4th day, I started to get an uneasy feeling. I had given him a few opportunities to approach me, but he always kept his distance. After the first week, I was super creeped out and started walking my dog at different times of the day, but he was always there. By the end of the 2nd week, I told my parents. They told me to stop walking the dog and just play with her in our fenced-in backyard, and I obliged. A week goes by. I had not walked my dog since I told my parents and had forgotten about the encounter, if it can even be called that. One day, I went out to get the mail after watching Unsolved Mysteries. That show has, and always will, creep me out, so I was already a bit jumpy after a particularly frightening episode. I opened the door, and as soon as I did, my heart stopped and freaking dropped out of my ass. Prince Charming, was sitting on his bike across from my house. I awkwardly smiled at him, then yelled something into the house, responding to someone who wasn't there so he wouldn't think I was alone, and then closed the door. He sat there for like 15 minutes, then rode away. After he left, I called my dad in hysterics. My dad came home and we talked about calling the police, but felt we didn't have anything really to report. My dad gave me his display shotgun, unloaded of course, before he went to work the next day in an effort to calm me down and let go of him so he could go to work. I felt better knowing I had a weapon, even if it wasn't loaded, and begrudgingly let him go. Charming showed up again, and I argued with myself on what I should do. After about 10 minutes of him sitting in front of my house, I went to get the mail, shotgun in hand. The minute he saw that I was holding that, he rode away. I was left feeling like a total badass. Although the next day he was there again, this time riding in front of my house 15 or 20 times. Then he was MIA for about a month. By this time, I had decided to try and walk my dog for the first time since the incident. I hadn't seen him and figured he had moved on. It was about 4 p.m. and both my parents were home, so I felt confident in walking the dog. Plus, they were in the front yard and the road was straight, so they were keeping an eye on me. The walk was uneventful until we got to the bridge. I turned around to walk back, and this guy is directly behind me on his bike, like freaking Houdini. He said something to me in a language I didn't understand. I gave him an awkward, "You almost made me shit myself" smile, and then started back down the sidewalk. He rode his bike beside me, closer than I thought possible considering he was on a bike, all the while talking to me in his creepily attractive voice in unknown language. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My dog was unable to go faster and was too fat for me to carry. I just kept telling him I didn't understand and nudging him away. With every nudge I gave him, he leaned towards me twofold. He was slowly pushing me off the sidewalk and into the field. When I realized what was going on, I gave him a bit of a stronger push and started to walk a bit faster, dragging poor dog Zilla behind me. Charming grabbed my wrist, talking to me in his foreign tongue. I yanked my wrist away, but he just grabbed my upper arm. My stepmom saw this from down the street and yelled, "Sonny, you coming?" from down the block. I responded with a yes, and Charming let go, I think realizing that somebody saw what was happening. He followed me home, talking in a low voice, then sat outside the house for a moment before my dad came out of the garage, like Paul Bunyan with his axe. I was forbidden from walking about the neighborhood by myself, and the police were called. They said they would keep a lookout, but that was all they could do. The next day, I was awoken by an ominous knocking on the door. I hesitantly answered it. On the other side was the officer I had talked to the day before. He said that the neighbors behind us called because somebody was in our backyard. When the police arrived, they found Charming trying to pop the kitchen window open with a rather large knife. In his pocket, he had zip ties, a pair of lacy red underwear, and a small baggie of coke. Not only was he in his 30s, he was a pedophile that had failed to report his address and had been unaccounted for the last couple months. Needless to say, he was locked up. We got an alarm system and I never walked my dog again. We went to dog parks instead. I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, UK. I was 12 years old, and let's just say I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. I was smoking, drinking, and staying out late around this time of my life. So I was bunking off school. My mom was at work, and it was late morning time, around 11 a.m. I wanted to buy some cigarettes, but as I was well under the legal age was 16 at this time, I had to hang around outside the shop and ask strangers if they would take my money and purchase them for me. About 1.5 miles from my house, there was a little shop called the Spar. It was on a fairly busy road. A row of hedges lined one side with a gap that led into the field beyond and houses on the opposite side. So I was standing maybe 10 paces from the shop, waiting for people to walk past so I could ask them to purchase my cigarettes for me. I usually second-guessed if they would be willing by how they looked. I asked a lady, maybe mid-40s, shoulder-length blonde hair, black business trousers, and a pink elbow-length jumper. She looked like she smoked and she said no. I asked a guy, maybe mid-50s, shaved brown hair, and he was wearing blue jeans and a white shirt. He just ignored me. So I was getting desperate by this point and decided on asking anyone that came by. Then I see a rather disheveled-looking man coming up the road towards me past the row of hedges. He was wearing dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned-up dark brown, but not the same shade of brown, dirty velvet jacket. He had a black bowler-type hat on, and he kind of limped a little as he walked. As he got closer to me and I was trying to suss out if he looked like the type that would probably purchase 12-year-old cigarettes, I noticed that he was probably homeless and possibly in his late 50s or early 60s, but I thought, he probably smokes, so I'll ask him. As he approached me, I gave him the usual line. "Excuse me, mate, would you please go into that shop and get some cigarettes for me?" He stopped and thought for a second, then said, "How old are you?" I lied. "I'm 15, almost 16. Then he said, "Alright, which ones do you want?" and held out a really dirty hand. I gave him my money and asked him to get me 10 sovereigns. I had the exact change. He goes into the shop and I'm waiting outside, excited. I'm finally getting my cigarettes and can go home and chill out before I have to leave the house again to make it look like I've just gotten home from school. He comes out and gives me 20 sovereigns. I am miffed to say the least and say, "But I only gave you enough for 10. And I start panicking because I don't have any extra money on me to give him. At this point, he hooks my arm in his, very tightly holding my arm and very firmly to his side, and starts to walk back towards the hedge-lined road. All the while he's telling me how I can make up for not having the extra money for the cigarettes. I'm kind of stunned at this point and my mind is blank. I guess I was in some kind of shock. He leads me through the gap in the hedges and into the field, all the while talking non-stop, still briskly walking with my arm locked in his. He's telling me how I can come into his house and help him fix the roof tiles. I'm still in silent shock. The field is huge, and I can see it leads into more fields and more fields. I can hear the cars behind me getting more distant. I can't see any houses for miles. There are just fields. He's still talking, but I'm not taking in what he's saying, and my mind starts to race. I realize that something about this isn't quite right finally, and I have to get away. As he is still walking, still holding my arm, I suddenly violently pull back. With my arm straight, it slides my arm out of his very quickly, and he goes flying towards and lands in a heap on the floor, and I take one big step backwards. I'm terrified at this point, but still in shock. I can't speak. He's lying on the ground groaning and holding his leg like he's in a lot of pain. "Why'd you do that?" "You really hurt me. Help me up." He's holding his leg and holding his hand out for me to help him up now. I'm frozen and my mind is racing so fast. I'm looking at this disheveled man right in the eye, lying on the ground, groaning like he is in pain, but something about this situation doesn't sit right with me. My gut is telling me to run. Don't help him up. "I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I? I helped you out. Why'd you do this? You hurt me. Help me." I take another step backwards, all the while looking into his green eyes. All of a sudden, he stops groaning and asking me to help him up. He points his finger at me, looking me right in the eye, and says, "You are a very smart girl." It was like an electric shock ran through my body, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could. When I've gotten off the hedge road and turned into the next road, I slow as I'm out of breath. I start bawling my eyes out and I'm shaking uncontrollably. I kept checking behind me, catch my breath, and don't stop running until I get home. Pleased to say, I was terrified I'd bump into that man again, and I never tried to buy cigarettes from that shop ever again. Stranger danger was something my mom was hyper-vigilant about teaching us. She'd always warn us about the horse farm down the street and tell us registered sex offenders lived there. Well, it was about a mile away, and I usually was only that far from home if I was on my bike or with a group, so I wasn't very concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighborhood when some neighbors I didn't know well began to talk to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbors, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them at Halloween, if that. I was probably 7 or 8. They told me they were giving away a trampoline, and, oh man, I had always wanted one. Begged my parents for one for years. I was so excited. I told them I'd have to ask my parents though. They told me I could just have it. It was in the backyard waiting for me, but not to come back with my parents. I thought that was a little strange and didn't listen to them about not getting my parents, but still wanted the trampoline. Now my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him this, it didn't raise any red flags, and he came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knocked on their door and waited at their front steps, but nobody came to the door. I was bummed. I really wanted that trampoline. Years later, reflecting on the event, I realized that there was a small fenced area in that yard where They'd sometimes ride a horse. I once even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode. I didn't think of it as a farm, as aside from the one horse and fenced-in area, it was a pretty normal yard, so my mother's warnings were in vain. I shudder thinking about what would have happened if I had gone to the house alone. Thankfully, I had a bit of sense though. At the time, I didn't realize how close I was to danger. Just how close I was to having a trampoline before those people inexplicably took my dream away. So, pedophile neighbors, let's not meet again unless you're serious about the trampoline this time. These are some of the incidents I remember from a period of about 3 years when we lived in the first house my parents purchased. When I was in elementary school, my parents purchased their first home. It was an older, built in 1920 home on about an acre lot. The previous owners happened to only live 2 houses down and went to church with us. They were a couple in their late 50s. Even though there were only 2 houses down from us, we couldn't see each other's property. We couldn't even see our next door neighbors because a wall of pine trees taller than our homes divided our property. The first odd incident happened when my mom got a call from the previous owner, the man, berating her for allowing her kids to get up on the garage roof and jump onto the trampoline. He went on and on about how we were going to damage his roof. My mom politely explained to him that it was her home and not his responsibility. He didn't like this answer and tried to continue the conversation, but my mom just hung up. It wasn't until later that it hit her that he must have been somewhere in our yard to see us kids up there. Shortly after, unbeknownst to me, my mom started receiving weird phone calls late at night when my dad was at work. My dad worked night shifts. Sometimes it was just a man breathing heavily, and other times it was a man speaking gibberish. She at first thought that it was just some teens doing prank calls. One afternoon, though, I was home alone with a girlfriend. We were about 12 when the phone rang. I answer the phone, and a man asks to speak to my mother. I give the standard that she can't come to the phone right now and asks if he would like for me to leave her a message. This man explodes into a fit of rage, screaming at me that I was a worthless piece of shit, and that he knew I was home alone. I quickly hung up the phone and told my friend. We were hiding in a dark corner, debating whether or not to call the cops when my mom arrived home. We, of course, filled her in on the phone call I'd received. My mom made light of the situation, saying it was probably just a prank call. It wasn't until years later that she would admit to me that she was scared but didn't want me to be scared as well. My mom kept getting calls late at night, but now intermixed with the breathing and the gibberish were threats. She tried to not put too much thought into it. We went about our lives for the most part and started making our new house our own. First up was painting. The majority of the walls in the house were covered in some ugly faux wood paneling. Not long after we started painting over it, the previous owner made a comment to my mom at church about how stupid he thought it was for her to cover up that nice paneling. Knowing that he hadn't been over, she asked him how he knew she was painting. Instead of answering her question, he just kind of continued on about what a mistake she was making. My mom had my dad change the locks that week. At the very back edge of our yard was a wall of blackberry bushes. One day, my mom went out to pick them, and who do you think was out there with buckets full of our berries? The previous owner. My mom asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he was getting ready to freeze his blackberries. My mom told him in no uncertain terms that this was not his property or his blackberries. He laughed in her face and left, taking his buckets of our berries. My mom was furious and tried to get my dad to go and tell him to give us our berries back. My dad, however, insisted that she should let it go. The previous owner continued to bother my mom whenever he happened to see her, asking things like who was up at such and such hour at our house because he saw lights on, and refusing to say how he saw a light was on in our home. Fast forward to the winter. I have always been an early riser. One morning at about 4 a.m., I'm in the shower. The bathroom I was in was right next to our driveway. In fact, the only window in the bathroom looked out into the driveway. Our driveway was long, and at the end were our garage and shop, which were not connected to the house. Anyways, I heard the gravel crunching like somebody was walking outside. I figured that my dad had probably gotten home early and was taking our trash out to the road or something. So I continue my shower, get out and get dressed, go into the kitchen where I see my mom. This is normal as she is an early riser too. I figured my dad would be inside by now and ask where he is. She looks confused and asks what I'm asking that for because I know he doesn't get home for a few more hours. I fill her in on what I heard, and she tells me not to worry about it and that we will tell my dad when he gets home. In a few hours, my dad gets home as usual. He parks at the very front of the driveway and comes in. We tell him about what I heard, and he goes out to investigate. In the snow are footprints in the driveway leading up to the bathroom window and all the windows on the back side of the house. Also, there were footprints leading up to the shop and the door is open. My dad goes in and somebody has turned off the heat lamp that we had over our pet guinea pigs. My dad follows the footprints but loses them past the pine trees and in the orchard that is behind them. This is towards the previous owner's house. We are all of course spooked, but my parents decide to not call the cops. Not long after this incident, late at night when my dad is at work, my mom gets another call. This time the man is repeatedly yelling at her to come in the kitchen. My mom hangs up and calls the cops. Now, our kitchen is full of huge windows, which at the time didn't have any coverings. When the cops arrive, they don't find anyone but do see footprints in the snow leading up to the kitchen windows. They tell my mom they are man-sized footprints, take photos of them and write a report. They also tell her to keep the door locked and to report if anything else happens. They also did routine drive-bys that night. That week, my parents invested in blinds and an alarm system. The phone calls and weirdness never stopped, though until we sold that house and moved to a new state. My mom has always been convinced that the creepy calls came from the previous owner. There are probably more creepy incidents that took place with him, but I can't remember them all. Also, I know my parents kept a lot of things private as to not scare us. Although we did find out later after we moved that he became a scout leader but was quickly removed from the position because of complaints by mothers that he was being threatening and inappropriate. Nobody would really give details though. About 2 years ago, I posted on this subreddit about a man named Bob who was harassing me at work. I can link the story if anyone is interested. He would follow me, trying to touch my hair, waist, anything that he could get away with. Shortly after I posted that, I was offered a promotion at the same chain, but at a store across town. I gladly accepted, hoping that I could lose this creep and move on with my life. For a while, everything was good. I made my new bosses aware of the situation as a precaution. They chose to continue having somebody walk with me to and from my car, especially when working the night shift. Then, about a year after I started, the calls began. My customer service clerks would answer and transfer the call to me. They said he only ever asked for a manager, and when I picked up, the caller would hang up as soon as I finished my introduction. Annoying, but whatever. Lots of kids played dumb pranks like that. The calls progressed. It started with him not saying anything, then changed it. Hey baby, you miss me yet? Not wanting to show whoever that this was acceptable behavior, I just hang up. Then the calls changed. They got more menacing. Hey sugar lips, I like your new car. Did you think you could get rid of me that easily? That's a cute top you're wearing. I bet it'd be really easy to rip it off. I know you think you're invincible, running to your bosses, but they can't stop me when you're alone. Soon after that, I saw his very distinct truck in the parking lot across the street. There's no way it wasn't him. My bosses insisted that it was a coincidence, that we couldn't do anything since he wasn't on our property. It didn't matter though. Every time I walked to or from my car, the truck would be across the street. I knew it was Bob, but he had gotten smarter. Our cameras didn't reach far enough to see him. If you looked at the person in the driver's seat, you couldn't make out many features beyond the hat, glasses, and phone. I could always feel his stare piercing through the windshield. Pictures started showing up in the store's mail. At first, it was me standing by my car, sitting with somebody outside at break, or me walking to or from the store. We still couldn't officially blame Bob, though I'm sure he was the one doing it. It escalated to pictures of me counting tills, standing in the store or interacting with customers. All shots that he had to be within 20 to 30 feet of me to get, but we couldn't find him on the security cameras. I became very paranoid and couldn't get any work done for fear of seeing him next. My bosses were wonderful and moved me to the back room where I was away from any and all customers. One final shot came through. Picture of me in the back of the store operating our forklift with "Miss you, sugar lips" across the back of it. Last August, I was accepted and started classes at my dream school 2 hours away from home. I quit my beloved job and moved, hoping that this would finally give me some freedom. A week ago, I started seeing what I think is Bob's truck rolling through campus. Today, I found a note in my car with a picture of me talking to my boyfriend. The note said, "Miss me, sugar lips? Don't worry, even he can't protect you." After binging for about 12 hours straight of YouTube readings of this subreddit, my mind is in a dark place, though I can't entirely blame it. My mind goes here often. This happened 3 years ago, but requires some background. My best friends and I grew up in a sleepy, wannabe New Jersey Central Florida town, and were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade when I'd overheard her talking to another classmate about Bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion. We became fast friends and soon were inseparable. Soon began the gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. We were practically siblings, and she was the first person I come out to as bisexual. And in turn, I was the first person she told about being trans. Her home life was tumultuous, though. I can't say mine was any better. We often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became like siblings. Her father was an alcoholic, strict and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who soon gravitated towards the hicks and jocks when we entered high school, and her mother was a pseudo-vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23 and she was 22 at the time, we had another long night of sleeping over in order to let her escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart and I was going into my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On the drive home the next morning, she excitedly told me that since she now had her own vehicle, she would be applying at pizza places that were in need of a driver. And I felt proud. It was the first time that she'd hunted for a job on her own, as I'd usually been the one to coax her to apply where I was working. Not that she ever lasted very long. My first training day goes by quite well. My coworkers are friendly and try to get me to talk more. My manager likes to playfully embarrass me, a fatter white guy, by trying to get me to talk good to the other coworkers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I had been up early in anticipation, and this was my first day on a job in a few months. I got home around noon, informed some of my internet friends that my first day went well, and around 5 p.m., I started to go to my bed, drained from a good day. As I'm preparing to lie down there, I get a Steam message from her, lamenting another fight with her mother and asking if she can come over. Now, I had started to grow a bit wary of the fights on their end. I'd begun to repair my relationship with my family and a few friends, and I had given her advice many times on how to better approach things. In my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message unread and drifted off into slumber. At around 8 p.m., I'm awakened by her bursting into my room in a panic. Having just been ripped from a dream, I am groggy and disoriented. I drag myself to the bathroom to relieve my bladder and come back to my room, find her rocking back and forth on my bed. It is at this time that I notice she is covered in blood, so I ask what happened. She informs me that she just saw somebody murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank. In the deepest parts of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a bit overdramatic? Why didn't she call the police? But this is my best friend. I've known her for over a decade, and we were the only two people in the world we could count on. I suppress it and go inform my sister and stepdad. My mom had passed the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place. Antisocial as always. It was the only way we knew how to handle emotional issues. When I inform my family, they immediately go to the same place I had, though they are far more vocal about it. I offer excuses I knew were flimsy and return to the room, phone in hand. I convinced her to call the police, and I can hear her explain the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down that it's most likely her father. They send cars over to check the crime scene and take her in for a statement. I ride with her in the back of the cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as was her father. I have work the next morning and request to be taken home by a police officer. It takes me a while to go to sleep that morning. The next day at work, I am quiet until my manager asks me what has happened. I inform him but decide to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me that she had confessed. Her mother threatened to kick her out for not being able to find a job, and in a rage, she had taken a kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer and I turned to face my monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say is, my best friend confessed to murdering her mother, before hanging up and lying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandma tells me she took a plea deal for life in prison, rather than the death penalty. Part of me wants to contest that, to demand they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a peaceful and caring woman's shadow. A larger part of me is just glad she's being punished. Natalie, you were my best friend, my sister, and my platonic soulmate. But please, let's never meet again. Well, I don't even know how to start. So, I live alone. I'm 21 years old, and I live in a low-income apartment because I'm in college and the money doesn't allow me to buy a newer one. Well, it all started when I was in my normal routine. I woke up, made coffee for myself, and went to work. That week, I left earlier because there was a power outage at work. I left at 3 p.m., took my bus, and got ready to go straight to college. It's a bit far from where I lived, so it was always a challenge to take a crowded bus every day. I was lucky this time since the bus was almost empty. Everything went normally. I had my classes, went to a friend's house, and went home. Up to that point, everything was normal. Until I came back by Uber. I'm too scared to take the bus late at night. I arrived at my apartment, entered my building, and saw a man sitting in front of some apartments. I'd never seen him there before, but I let it go because he could be a relative of a resident. I went inside. In my apartment, I was watching TV as usual, and it was around 11 p.m. I think. I was going to sleep when I heard a very loud noise coming from outside the apartment. I was in shock because it sounded like a door slamming. I even saw my door slightly open. At that point, my soul left my body, I think. I didn't even think twice and called my friend who lived about 2 blocks above me. He came, but he didn't see anything. We looked in all of my rooms in my apartment and there were no traces at all. Until we decided to check the building's security camera. We spoke to the security guard and he said he would inform the supervisor about it. Then we saw on the camera the same man I saw earlier trying to open my apartment door. He succeeded, but when he was entering, somebody probably heard him. He ran to the building's exit. Well, at that point, everyone in the building already knew. We called the police, and the police searched the entire building and almost asked everyone if they knew that guy from the video. Absolutely no one knew that guy. Then I asked how the security guard didn't see that guy enter the building, and he said that so many people passed by at that time. I even forgot his face, and remember, it was a low-income apartment, so I had no hope from the security guard. I kind of left it to the police to see if they could find anything out, and to this day, nobody knows who he is. I always try to talk to the police to see if they found anything, and they always say they're still looking, but nothing. And I really think this guy followed me on some day of my crazy routine and waited for the moment to do something that miraculously didn't happen. I've always wanted to share this story, and I've decided to use an old throwaway account since I usually just lurk. I have no real way of proving my credibility, but if you've ever visited or live in a rural part of South Asia, you can probably vouch for me in saying that it's a lot more plausible than one might assume. Also, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but I wanted to recount it precisely the way I remember it. I had one of those moments recently where a lot of things came together in my brain to make sense of an event that my child mind couldn't properly comprehend at the time. So, my mom was born and raised in the UK, but she is of South Asian descent, and since I'm mixed, she tries really hard to make sure I'm in touch with my culture. This meant that, as a child, we made a lot of frequent visits back home. It's like every summer I can remember we spent there. And then it suddenly just stopped after this incident. My mom's family back home lives in an extremely rural part of the country. There's a lot of poverty surrounding our family home, so we rarely left our relatively nice part of the village. I was never allowed out to explore, and coming from the concrete jungle that is London, I was always so curious. I'm going to explain what happened on this one particular day, the way I remember experiencing it, and then I'll explain what I failed to realize at the time. I was 8 years old at the time. One of my uncles from a neighboring village would often visit with his children, and when they did, my mom would let me go with them to a small hut-like shop that sold sweets and snacks about 15 minutes away from the family home. My cousins were 11 and 19, both male, and it was broad daylight. To get to the shop, we had to walk through a small DIY road, and on both sides is what I would call the jungle. It was basically just lots of trees and bushes as far as you can see. You can't really see anything beyond the trees, just a lot of greenery. I'm mixed with East Asian, and I definitely get my looks from my dad's side, so being an obvious foreigner in a rural part of back home, meant that I was pretty used to strangers staring at me and asking me questions. I was also used to creepy men that would tell me I was beautiful because I have pale skin. My mom warned me about these men and made sure I knew to stay away from them. So the road to the hut was paved with creepy people, making creepy comments, and my cousins basically telling them to leave me alone in less pleasant terms. There was also a group of young guys. Some of them had motorbikes and some were just chilling. One of them waved at me and he seemed friendly enough, and I'd met so many people that my mom was convinced I must remember from last time that I had zero recollection of, so I just waved back and went about my day. Once we got to the hut, we immediately started losing our self-control with the snacks. The owner was super friendly, and he let us try a bunch of the sweet mishtis he had. He also had kulfi ice cream for the first time. I distinctly remember being really excited because my mom and one of the ladies that worked as a cook both love kulfi and ice cream, so I thought it would be a nice surprise for them. I asked for 3 and the nice guy gave me 4, and so my hands were full and they were quickly melting, and he told me to run, go home quickly. I told my cousins I would get a running start, and once they finished, they could catch up. I would still be in their line of sight, plus it was daylight and it was a very busy road. I start running back, and there were a few older aunties standing at the top of the road, and something about their presence gave me a sense of security. I felt a lot safer knowing that they were there, and paired with the fact that my cousins were able to see me clearly, I felt comfortable enough to just walk back leisurely, minding my business, eating my ice cream. I passed the group of guys, and the one that waved at me came over to me. He said I was X's niece, right? X being my uncle, and he jokingly took one of my ice creams and said, "She got an ice cream for Mama." Mama means uncle in our language, and so I just assumed he was a friend of my uncle's. He asked me when I arrived and how I was finding the country. He was so friendly, and he didn't look like this stereotypical creep. When I said I was going to go home, he said, "Why don't you let Uncle take you? You can ride on my motorbike." I think that's when something clicked in my mind that maybe he wasn't the friendly uncle I thought he was. That's also when I realized I was pretty much circled in and was surrounded by the group. And it's also when I realized I couldn't see my cousins or the group of old ladies, which also meant they probably couldn't see me. I wish I could explain in words how helpless and afraid I felt. I have all the threats in the world explained to me by my mom in a country where I knew I was vulnerable and had to be very cautious. And I still managed to find myself in a dangerous situation. Luckily, my cousins came running and shouting, probably because that was their responsibility, and the guys ran off into the jungle. This creeped me out because there was nothing in that jungle. It was just trees as far as anyone could see, and I knew that it would be nearly impossible to find them in all of that. We caused quite the scene, and the villagers seemed to react as if they were already on edge. When we told my family what happened, I was basically on house arrest, and my mom refused to let me out of her sight. I was pretty shook up about the whole situation, and so honestly, I was kind of grateful for that. I put it down to my paranoia, but at the time, I would get overwhelming feelings of being watched. Our village is quite small. Like amongst them, it's an everyone knows everyone sort of thing. My uncle is also a big community figure, and he's very well known amongst the villagers, which is why the men probably put 2 and 2 together that I was his niece. Having foreign family over is usually a pretty big deal, and having a niece that is mixed race was also a very big deal. I'm sure the word got around. He realized that there was a group of men on motorbikes who would frequently go past our house. They stayed a decent distance from our home though, and that they weren't anyone we would have known. It's creepy to think about now, the lengths they were going to. A couple of days before we were due to fly back, I had my second, last, and worst encounter with this particularly friendly uncle. It was night, and it was like every other night where we would play board games or card games in the front room. Because it was so hot, I went to my bedroom and I was playing on my Nintendo DS. What a throwback. When I saw out of the corner of my eye something at the window. It was someone staring at me. It was definitely him. The worst part is he had the creepiest, sickest, and most twisted smile I've ever seen. He put a finger to his lips, but I did the literal opposite and started screaming hysterically. I had been on edge since the ice cream incident, so what might seem like an overreaction was just my natural response. I can't really tell you what happened next because no one has ever told me. My very large uncle and his also very large friends are not known to be the friendliest of people, but I was told he was dealt with and that he would never bother me again. We recently received a wedding film from one of my cousin's weddings, and part of the film was her leaving to get to the venue, and I noticed that the jungle was no longer there. It had been basically cut down. For the first time, I could see beyond the greenery. That's when my mom explained to me that my uncle had it cut down not long after that particular visit because of the headcutters. It sounds even more sinister in my language. My entire life, I've wondered what would have happened to me if I had gotten on that motorbike. But now I know with reasonable certainty what his intentions were. During that time, a gang had been kidnapping beggar children. It took a while for the village to realize because it's not unusual for beggar children to go missing. When we were there, people were vaguely aware that it was becoming a trend. A couple of months later, a head was found. It became known in our village, but people tried to keep it quiet to avoid getting a bad name. The problem went away once a lot of the greenery was cut down, so there was nowhere left to hide, but it's also when they realized the magnitude of what had happened. The weird thing is, I've known about the headcutters for a while. I knew it was something that had occurred in our village, but for some reason until recently, I never put two and two together. But now that I have, I think often about what nearly happened to me. But more importantly, what happened to a handful of children in our little village. Think about the fact that beyond our relatively small circle, nobody thinks about them and no one is haunted by their deaths. So to the creepy uncle with the motorbike, let's not meet again. I wish the children had never met you, and I hope no one ever has the misfortune of meeting you ever again. Edit. Because a few people have been curious, this took place in Bangladesh. Also, thank you for the upvotes. I shared this mainly because I've always just wanted to tell someone my experience, but it's not a topic I feel comfortable discussing IRL. However, I've always felt a lot of guilt because while I was lucky to be safe, there were children who weren't. This man haunts my dreams, but I am still very blessed to be able to dream. I had no idea who those children were, and I have no possible way of ever knowing their names or even tracing their families, but in a very, very small way, this feels like a tribute to them. We may not know their names, but there are around 900 people who now know they exist and know their story. And for that, I thank you, Reddit.